Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Captain Shaq here, and welcome to the Awakening of the Rebellion 2.11 update, the Jump to Hyperspace update. Now, I say update, but that's not really fair. It's more like if this was a paid development team, a content drop, or even the amount of content that you'd find like a paid DLC, right? It is massive. This is the big release for the year, and they've released it just in time. You can play it right now, just in time for the holiday break, so we can all jump on and have a good time. So today in this video, it's gonna be a long one, we're gonna go through the 12 pages of patch notes. Let's talk about the big release. The flagship feature for 2.11 is, of course, what has been codenamed Bigchungus. This is the gigantic galactic map that you can play on. They didn't get rid of the old one, and they didn't get rid of the classic one. They're both still there. But Bigchungus, aka the large galactic map, has, for comparison, 190 planets on it. Our last campaign took us 70 episodes to complete, and it had 103. Yeah, it's a massive map. Not only that, though, they've added some new features to the map, like we've got hyperlanes. Now, other mods have had this. I think the base game even had something similar, where these hyperlanes are scattered across the map. How they work is, you see these bright lines. These each indicate a in-canon hyperlane, like the Corellian Run or the Corellian Trade Spine, that your ships will travel much faster along. So you'll actually see them, if you have control of the hyperlane, take those routes to get to their destination, even if it isn't the most direct route, because it is the fastest. So controlling these lanes are super important to your campaign's longevity if you want to win. The Empire has far more control over many of the hyperlanes at the beginning of their campaign, but they are kind of blockaded. You're gonna have to deal with a few worlds before you can have full control. I love this. It gives us one more decision that we have to make on what we're going to focus on and what's important to us as commanders. Another addition to the galactic map when we're looking at all of these worlds is the fact that they've changed the planet abilities. So you're gonna get a lot of bonuses, and you're gonna get a lot of buffs to certain units based on what planets you control. Like, for instance, if you own a certain rebel world down in the far south corner of the map, then you'll have your boost power to engines ability recharged 30% faster. They've also gotten rid of one of the planetary abilities that's been in the game since the initial release, and I'm really happy they ditched it. It was basically an ability that made you completely immune to weather effects. So, the original devs built a cool weather system in the game, and then you'd get this planet and it wouldn't have any effect on your forces. For the most part, mostly. It was called weather training or something. It is now gone, so weather is a factor, so keep that in mind when you're landing on a planet. It no longer just lowers your FPS when it rains. Some major changes have come in the form of rebel infrastructure rework. You can now build supply depots alongside garrison bases. So your Alliance HQs, your Alliance bases, they can now be built alongside. So what does this mean? Well, it means that you can decide between more than just, is this a defense planet or is it an economic planet? You can go in between. Now, of course, if you build a supply depot on a planet with a very limited amount of space to build stuff on, you're gonna lose out on the possibility of having, say, turbo lasers or shield generators. On the flip side, this could be great income for you and have a little bit of a way to defend that world if, say, the Empire of the Black Sun come a-knocking. Overall, very cool, and I hope we see even more fun stuff that you can put on, well, planets in the future. Another thing that you're gonna notice on the grand map here is that there are a lot more colors than there used to be. Well, we still have the Hapes, we still have the Huts, and now we've got a gray faction that are the neutral factions. These are gonna be your sector security forces that are only for that one planet. These are gonna be the Umbarans, or just any local group that controls that one world that doesn't really align with the Empire or the Rebels or the Black Sun. Meaning you're probably gonna see some cool units that are based around that. Like Mandalorian space is now all controlled by a fourth party. Who will get to control Mandalore? Well, you'll have to find out in your own campaign. A lot of these planets, though, have their own themes for buildings and star bases, and their unit rosters are all different to have a theme for that faction. I can't wait to explore some of these. There are a bunch of new units that have been added to the game, but the majority of them are indigenous personnel from the various worlds we just talked about, like Weequay or Mimbadese, or even the Pike soldiers. There's even Zygarians on Zagara. If you don't know who these guys are, they're kind of like cat-fox hybrid people who are known for being slavers in the galaxy. They're basically in competition for being the biggest scumbags of all Star Wars. Very cool. And you'll be able to train these if you take the world over as the Black Sun. A new mechanic that I have yet to see pop up for me is the ground hostile raid mechanic. Basically, there is a chance for hostile outposts to be on a world. So those factories that we would see every time we play through a campaign, if you can go and capture them, they would normally spit out a few units for you to use in the invasion. Well, now there's a chance that those can be a third party to the fight and hostile. So do you run over there and poke the bear on the off chance that you might be pissing off some other faction that happens to live on this planet? Or do you just ignore it? That is now a tactical choice that you'll have to make. Or it might be a great distraction for your enemy that's on the world. And since they've reworked planetary combat AI to be a little smarter when you're doing ground invasions, who knows how that's gonna work out? I can't wait to see what kind of battles we end up with. There's been a lot of optimization with the game so far. They've optimized infantry rigs to reduce lag and crashing of the Death Trooper, the Storm Commando, the Scout Trooper, Pirate Soldier, Riflemans, the BS Enforcers. They've also fixed, and I think this has to do with the Petroglyph patch that came out, a lot of the issues with crashing that we had during our very last stream of Awakening of the Rebellion for the last campaign. When we had those crashes, it was specifically pointed out by Mr. President, one of the devs of Awakening of the Rebellion, that these crash issues that they are aware of have been fixed in this version. Rebel Infantry have gotten a decent rework. There are now new weapon models, Sec Forces and Alliance Army and Spec Forces all have distinct looks now. You'll even see a few new units mixed into squads that you'll already find recognizable. They're also split up a number of new weapon systems in different squads. You'll have stuff like heavy trackers, or they model a G8, and there's new models for the new Republic troopers, which I can't wait to see. They've reworked the guide system, so when the game first opens up, and actually you can click this little button down here, it'll open up the guide for each of the factions, for the factions and planets and corruption and how all that stuff works. Well, those have all been rewritten to be a little bit more concise. There is a new hut story mission if you're playing as the Black Sun. And I love this idea because it very much reminds me, the way that they've described it, as the Mon Cala buffer zone mission, except for it's for the Black Sun and it's around the hut territories. And if you mess it up, if you can't get that control, then you will actually lose control of Nal Hutta to the Empire. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out as story events build. A new indicator for missions has been added, and I kind of blame myself for this because I can never find the planet that I'm looking for when a mission is issued. Now, there's a blinking indicator to tell you, hey, this planet is the location for whatever mission Mon Mothma or Palpatine has given you, and you need to go do it. You gotta escort those refugees, or you need to scout this out with a stealth unit. That's really cool because they've also rebalanced the reward system for it and how often we get missions. In my testing, I actually had 2 missions on at the same time to go run and do. So maybe we'll see a lot more of those so we can build up that support for the faction that we're playing as. A lot has been changed in the way of balanced. They've reworked planetary income for every planet, which makes sense because of how large the map actually is. They've also designated worlds as manufacturing worlds that might have HQs for certain companies that exist in the Star Wars universe, so keep an eye out for those, as they will probably be high income or have a really cool planetary bonus, like the speed boost one I mentioned earlier. Or you might find worlds with like really high populations for good income, or you might run into Aggie worlds, agricultural worlds that are known for growing large numbers of crops. Again, will probably net you a large amount of income. And I've noticed a lot of those seem to have a lot of extra planetary slots because they're Aggie worlds. If you take Gamorrean, you can make Gamorreans cheaper on the galactic map, which is hilarious. They've changed mechanics now for how the filter system works, and they've made it super useful. If you're paused, you can actually still use the filter buttons, and they will still work. Because as you know, if you've played this, particularly on the harder difficulties, if you unpause, the AI is making 100 decisions a second, and you can't keep up. That's why there is a pause button. Now you can filter through all the build units that you can do and all the stations very quickly and easily. That wasn't possible in the prior versions, and that is very cool that they fixed it. Another thing in the UI that they've fixed is if you've ever queued up a bunch of limited units, like for instance, if you're like me and you click on Kashyyyk and you want to train up a bunch of Wookiees and you just pound that button until you max out the bar on how many you can train, but you already have 4 or 5 platoons out in the galaxy, there is a limit to how many you can build of those. Well, the game would allow you to queue up more than you were allowed to build, and then it would just cancel them. Now it'll actually stop you from queuing up more than you're able to build so that you don't waste your time thinking you're gonna have 5 platoons of Wookiees ready to rock and roll, and in reality you only have 1. So that's changed. Now, keep in mind, the patch notes on this are 12 pages long. I'm just pointing out stuff that I find interesting. If you want to check out the patch notes yourself, feel free. I'll put a link in the description to the Discord for Awakening of the Rebellion if you want to download it yourself. They've already actually put out another patch on top of this one to fix a few issues that were there. They've reworked how flight mechanics work, so you're going to see stuff like X-Wings and TIE Fighters and Snow Speeders all flying a little bit more naturally and able to do gun runs a lot better. You don't have to micro them nearly as hard. We were doing this with some TIE Fighters earlier today, and they were just coming down hard on Imperial squads, or on Rebel squads, and it was awesome. I can't wait to see how the rest of the fighters work. They've also made it so the Snow Speeder can wrap other targets. What other targets, we don't know. I've always pitched that it should be able to wrap the Rancor and the Clone Wars big walker with a third leg and the giant artillery cannon I can't think of the name of right now. Absolutely worth it. So that's cool. That means that the Snow Speeder is now a little bit more valuable. They've also lowered its cost, so they're kind of cheaper. Another thing that they've done is they've really buffed up the strength of the gunships. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I don't really use the gunship because I found that they die pretty easily and they didn't really play their role very well. They were too expensive to replace, and they were fine. Like, they would do it. They would take out other enemy starfighters okay. Well, now they've increased the size of gunships. We'll use the X4, the Rebel one, as an example. They've increased the number that you get per squadron. They've also upped the amount of health that they have. And they've made certain weapon systems like laser cannons and heavy laser cannons less accurate against gunships, so they shouldn't be just getting two-shotted out of the sky. One of the more interesting changes that they've made is that they've adjusted how carriers work. Now, when I talk about carriers, I'm talking about your Quasar, your Tonfalk, your Bolt carrier, your Liberator, and your Gladiator. So in that size range, we're not talking about capital ship carriers, and we're not talking about like Gazanti carriers, which are really just building a group of TIE fighters and then giving them something to transport them around. It's not really a carrier. So what they've done is the variants of the carriers have been removed. The AI was spamming carriers because there were so many of them, they could choose multiple types to build. So they would build each version a bunch of times. It's why towards the end of our campaign, we saw the Empire with these huge stacks of carriers with tons of fighters. Now you're getting one version for each. That means that each carrier has a defined role. For instance, the Quasar, which used to have a bomber variant and a starfighter variant, is now just a starfighter variant. They get a 2-2 X-Wing squadron and a 1-1 A-Wing squadron, meaning they get a wave of 2 that gets replaced one time. And then they get 1 A-Wing that gets replaced one time. That's still great. 2 free X-Wing squadrons and an A-Wing squadron are pretty damn strong if you can take over Sullust and build them. The Tonfalk is getting a 1-2 TIE Fighter squadron, a 1-2 TIE Interceptor, and a 1-1 TIE Bomber, meaning that you're going to be able to replace those TIE Fighters as you need to, and the TIE Interceptor, at least for a couple of waves, but you only get the 1 Bomber and 1 replacement. The Bolt Carrier, I think, is the most interesting one. Its description right now is wrong, as it tells you the wrong fighters that it gets, but it gets, as a picket ship, so it's already got a really good role, it gets the Y-Wing as this will be an early tech built vehicle that you could build. It gets a Y-Wing right away. It gets a 1-0 Y-Wing. It also gets a T-Wing and an R41. So you get a little bit of everything. A little interception, a little bombing capability, and a little, well, we're gonna kill Corvettes with that R41. The other version is still there, the one that doesn't carry fighters at all, because it's not a carrier. The Liberator is going to the 1 U-Wing, 2 Cutlass, and then the Gladiator is a 1 TIE Bomber and 2 TIE Brutes. I kind of like that for the Gladiator. You've already got a weapon platform there in the Gladiator itself, and now you get some kind of tanky ties to eat some time for you while you shell the crap out of your enemy with the Gladiator's turbo lasers. It'll be interesting to see how this changes the balance. This might make, I think, capital ship carriers like the shield generator for the Rebellion, the MC-80 bubble shield, I think it's the Justice is what they call it. That one actually has a very decent, it's a battle carrier technically, but I never used it that way. I was just interested in it for its bubble shield. Now, well, its loadout is actually pretty good, and it gives you a bubble shield, and it gives you the weapon systems of a capital ship. So we might see that more often in fleets for other reasons than just a fleet protection buying time. On to some cool Imperial stuff that I found fairly interesting. The 501st now have the TL-50 repeater. They've got thermal and frag grenades. They've got frag grenade launchers, and I think this is a new model. They look really good. You get the 501st by deploying Vader into the field, and they're tanky too. They have nerfed the kind of broken U-Wing ion repeater that could do 2 passes on a shield generator and just outright kill it. That was not an intended gameplay mechanic, so it no longer will just destroy buildings. It's an ion weapon. We already talked a little bit about ground aircraft changes, about how they fly and how they do their gun runs, but they've also changed how their armor works, how their shield regen works. They've also changed how AA works. So no longer will a single large AA turret cover an entire map. And they fixed the issue where starfighters like TIE fighters will almost come to a full stop when they're trying to target something, which meant it was really weird looking watching it try to fly and shoot stuff. And then it would get nailed by like a turbo laser because it wasn't moving. I think my favorite part of the aircraft change is how aggressively that they can bank in turns. It really does make a TIE fighter seem like a TIE fighter in a battlefield. One of the things that they've changed is that they've made the dumbfire rockets dumber. They've lowered the accuracy, but as a trade-off, dumbfire rockets will no longer proximity detonate if they miss their target, meaning the result of which is that the groups of vehicles will be more consistently hit. They nerfed the damage that flat guns do a bit, so they no longer be the end-all be-all of killing off every starfighter in the area. They still do the debuff though, so they're still very valuable. There are 2 pages of map changes, both on the ground and in space. I'm not gonna go through those because I think it'll be a lot of fun to discover those as we go, but just keep in mind that even though you've played on a battlefield, it's probably changed. There's also 2 pages full of fixes. For example, they managed to fix sandstorms so they have a bigger effect on maps, particularly the bigger maps. They added a proper icon to the Jedi Temple, so no more having just Karth's face there for no reason. This is a good place to end it. You can play this update right now over on Steam. 2.11, actually 0.2 is out, where they've fixed a few other issues. I wouldn't be surprised if we see more updates after the new year when the dev team is back from vacation and holidays and all that, but anyways, thank you, Awakening Rebellion devs, for working on this project for so long and making it so cool. It's also great to see that your team has grown. I saw that in the patch notes as well. If you're interested in the mod and you've never played it before, head on over to the link in the description below. That'll take you to the Steam Workshop. It's as simple as clicking the subscribe button and then just launching Forces of Corruption, going to your mods in the game and launching the mod that you want to play. It will restart the game and you're set to enjoy some Star Wars gaming goodness. Thank you everyone for watching, and I will catch you all in the next one. Later, everybody.